now we're recording this, and it will go onto our website next week. For those of you who don't know about ESLT, we work with private landowners who want to protect their land from development. That's their land may be wild, open, or working. We also partner with other land managers. If you'd like more information, there's tons on our website, or give our office a call. We'd be glad to answer any questions. Just a bit of Zoom etiquette. Please hold your questions till the end. If something pops up during Pete's presentation, feel free to pop it in chat. Gabrielle's going to be monitoring that. And keep yourself on Zoom. We all are right now, or I will be shortly as well, just to minimize background noise. And if you need to use the restroom, you know where it is at your house. So I don't have to point to the door or the hallway here. So again, thanks for joining us. And now I'm going to turn it over to Gabrielle. Gabrielle is our education coordinator and AmeriCorps member. So as an AmeriCorps member, Gabrielle has decided to give a year of service to our community. And she works full-time for ESLT for minimum wage and some health benefits. So she is providing a service for us all. So if you ever see her, give her a thanks. And I know we're not in person very much, but thanks, Donna. But if you do see her out and about, please give her a thanks. Gabrielle, I'm going to turn it over to you now to introduce the wonderful and fantastical Mr. Pete.
Hey, thank you, Kay. Thank you for being here. I just, before we get, I want to just brush over inside Pollinator Garden. That essentially is what the Growing Together series is part of, in order to help knowledge of gardening and pollinators and how to do that when it's really a big task. We're all here to learn and support each other. So essentially that's what this is here today, to discuss how to get wildlife pollinate our yard. I'm also some internet issues, so I apologize about but so I'll just make this brief. So if you're interested in certifying your garden ESLT, the Eastside Pollinator Garden, you can just reach out at ESLT, and I can help. You can call the phone and leave it, get back to you. And anyway, so that being said, we're appreciative of CNPS, California Society, Bristlecone, Inyo, and gardeners, community members, and Metabolic Studios that was this project this year. And we also couldn't do it without all, and Pete, and also here in the room. So I'll just pass the baton now, give the to Pete. That being said, asking a series after his presentation. If you have any additional questions, you can, so you don't forget them, or also you can always unmute yourself to group. And yeah, with all that said, if my internet a little spotty, here you go ahead.
You want to talk first?
Do I want to talk? Well, sure, of course. Why don't we share the screen?
Okay.
And thank you for being with me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be with you this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about gardening for wildlife. And you know, what does that mean? What's that concept about? And how can you get involved in it if you're not already, or get more involved than you are right now? I'm going to talk briefly I'm going to try to talk briefly at least, and I'm going to just barely scratch the surface. This is a really big topic, and so we're not going to get horribly deep into it. But I want to just give you a sense of what's possible and some questions to ask yourself about whether or not you want to do this, and to make some plans for how you can do it in your space in your yard. I always try to start by telling people that the number one principle that I have for trying to do gardening or anything else is the idea that it should be fun. So that's what I'm going to tell you now. And I want you to bear this in mind as we go forward. I want you to say to yourself, this is going to be great. This is going to be fun. I'm really going to want to do this over both the short and the long haul. Because if it gets to be drudgery, if it gets to be too big of a chore, and you find yourself hating it, it's not going to work out well for anybody or anything. One of the best things about gardening for wildlife, in my estimation, is that because you're doing a lot of native plant planting, and because you're not doing show place maintenance, it requires less maintenance from you. It requires less work from you. And so that always seems to be a good idea as far as I'm concerned. The reason that we're here and talking about this is that wildlife experience a lot of stresses, and those stresses, the number and the severity of those seem to grow incrementally every year since we first began talking about this. Those stresses include climate issues, temperature issues, habitat breakup, lack of habitat connectivity, and just a combination of things that make it really harder and harder all the time to be a wild critter. And you might wonder, why is it or how is it that an organization like the Eastern Sierra Land Trust, which is focused not entirely, as you can see from today, but largely on trying to help set aside and preserve large parcels of land into the future, how does that relate to my backyard? What has my backyard got to do with a crisis or a problem when people are talking about, hundreds or if not thousands of acres of land to be used to address it? Well, the reason is that your backyard can become part of a stairway or a stepping stone for birds, especially, to move about. Birds migrate, and so they move from their winter habitat to their summer habitat. And as they go across that distance, they need places to rest or to feed or to preen or get water or whatever that they need to do along that journey. And so even if there's not large tracts of land available, if your land sticks out to them and they can see that flying over, and particularly if it's stormy or it's windy or it's just difficult to make the journey, they can come down, take advantage of the habitat that you're created, and then they can move on. So everybody's backyard is really important. Everybody's front yard is really important. You don't have to have a lot of space. We'll have a lot of pictures of our yard. We have 2 acres, one of which is pretty feral, and one of which is gardened. We live out in Chalfont for reference, but you don't need that kind of space. You can make a difference with your yard in a space as small as a patio. So people who live in apartments can contribute to creating a better world for wildlife. And that's kind of what we're going to focus on as we go forward here. As I say, that the good news is that as gardeners, we can make a difference. We can basically landscape with plants that are friendly to wildlife, and actually create in our own yards little factories that produce food, that produce water to sustain wildlife as they go about their business. It's a mindful kind of thing. It's a different kind of gardening than ornamental gardening. The idea is to create gardens that act like nature. a garden that is made up of plants that are suited to the requirements of the site and that can thrive with minimal intervention from me. As you plan your garden, don't think about plants strictly in terms of ornamental purposes. Yes, but for their ability to fit into a landscape that supports the needs of pollinators and other wild things. And basically those needs are food, you can supply water, you can supply shelter and protection from predators, you can supply nesting structure, and you can and materials, and lastly sites for perching, and my favorite bird activity, which is called loafing. It's just what it sounds like. It's just what you and I do. It's what I do in my yard, and I encourage birds to do it in my yard as well. It's just hanging out, resting up, and getting ready for the next task. So as you look at this and you think, well, I'm kind of interested in doing this, one of the ways to get started is to just go outside, sit in your yard, and see what you already have going for you. Do you already have birds or pollinators that frequent your yard or the yard of your neighbors? If you like the things that are coming to your yard, why are they coming there? Are they coming, what kind of plants do they frequent? Do you see hummingbirds? If you see hummingbirds, what kind of plants are they on? What are they feeding on? If you have nesting birds, what are they nesting in? If you want more of them, that gives you a clue of what kind of plants you want to plant to encourage that kind of thing. So I think the best thing to do anytime you're going to do any gardening project is to go outside and take some time to see what you have and see what you have to work with and how that fits into what you're aiming to do. The other direction you can come from also is to decide what is it that I'd like to attract to my yard. We garden and do our outdoor activities. We have bird feeders, and I'll touch on that later, that are geared towards specific species of birds. We're big fans of finches. We're big fans of orioles, of tanagers, grosbeaks, and hummingbirds. And so we do a lot of things specifically to attract them. So if you say, I really like orioles and I'd like to see them in my yard, do a little research on what it is that orioles are attracted to, what kind of food sources. You don't have to have the kind of trees that support oriole nests to get orioles in your yard. We don't, but some people in our neighborhood do. So there are nesting pairs of orioles that use somebody else's trees to nest, but spend a lot of time in our yard because we've provided food and water sources for them to nest and fledge their babies. So if you see something in the wild and you say, wow, that's a really cool bird, I wonder if I could get some of that going in my yard, take a look at where that bird is. What kind of plants can you associate with that bird by observing it in the wild? And it doesn't have to be in the wild. It could be 2 blocks down the street in somebody else's yard. There's a spot in Bishop where someone has a tree that attracts a bunch of cedar waxwings every year. If you're a big cedar waxwing fan, go check that out and see, what do they have planted there? What kind of trees do they have that are attracting all these birds? So make an inventory of what you have, and then make an inventory of what you'd like to have. And then next to that inventory, set out what it is that you need to provide to make that attractive to those particular birds or other pollinators. As you decide to do your planting and get your garden going, think hard about doing native plants. They're particularly useful because they are better suited to support the land or the wildlife that you're trying to attract. So we have indigenous wildlife here. We're trying to get them into our yard. What better pathway to do that than to provide indigenous plant life in support of that? Native plants are also more hardy, and they're going to require less water over the long haul. As you plant for diversity. a diverse plant base will do several important things for you. First of all, it's not going to be susceptible to ravages of disease. Out here in Chalfont, we have a lot of people that planted cypress trees as windbreaks in the past. And so there are a great many, or now I guess the operative word is there were a great many cypresses out in our neighborhood. And then when the drought came in the decade before this, those trees suffered horribly. Most of them got sick. And then they got invaded by insects, and then they died. And so all of a sudden, if you had a windbreak that you raised with 25 cypress trees, your windbreak is gone. The same kind of thing can happen with any other kind of monocultural planting. And so diversity will protect you from that. Diversity will also attract a greater diversity of wildlife. If you have only one food source, you're only going to get the kind of critters that will take advantage of that source. So if you've created a garden that has more than one food source, that's a host for insects, healthy, plentiful insects, provides nectar, provides seeds, and provides fruit, you're going to get every variety of bird imaginable, at least that's in your vicinity, because you've provided all of the basic food sources. You're going to need to plant plants that support differing stages of life. So if you're going to do a butterfly garden, for example, you've got to support both the butterflies and also their larvae and caterpillars. So if you plant butterfly bush, that's going to be great for the adult butterflies, but what it doesn't do is sustain the larvae. So a butterfly garden, in addition to butterfly bush, is going to need to contain something like milkweed or Joe Pye weed or rudbeckias or coneflowers that will take care of both of those life stages. You also want to plant in a way that gives you productive food sources throughout the calendar year. Look for early and late bloomers. Look for plants that provide berries early and keep them as long as possible. Keep your seed heads and the dry fruits in place over the fall and winter rather than deadheading right away at the early level of fall. When you do plantings, you want to create multiple levels: ground covers, grasses, and other short flowers, mid-level on tall flowers, and shrubs and tall trees. This allows birds to carry out all of their life functions in your space. Planting groupings with mass plantings to support specific users. We have spaces in our garden where we have basically concentrated fruits like grapes and berries, and others where we have concentrated seed sources. As you get along and go along, you're going to discover that wildlife-friendly design is also aesthetically pleasing. So especially if you're a person like I am that is a real fan of big clumps of flowers or big clumps of similar plants. If you have these multiple layers, you're going to provide nesting opportunities for these birds. A great many locations in our yard provide opportunities for nesting, and those are not limited to just the trees themselves. A lot of nests are in garden ornamentation, and I think right now we probably have over a dozen nesting pairs scattered hither and yon. In addition to the sites, your yard can produce nesting materials like twigs and leaves and grasses. And then we also put out materials like scraps of cloth and fabric and also threads. Your taller plantings provide perching and observation opportunities. There can be many such locations or one single one that allows a view of the landscape, food and water sources, and provides a place from which to be on guard from predators. The more perching opportunities you have, the more perches you provide for birds like flycatchers to sit and then hop off, catch insects, and then come back to the perch. Think about planting also dense plantings. We have several locations of really dense shrubs, and those provide places for birds to rest, provide shelter, and provide some nesting opportunities. We did not have them, but in the yard right near to us that had an extremely dense growth of shrubbery, had a nesting pair of roadrunners one year. And again, the roadrunners came into our yard and spent a lot of time visiting with us and taking advantage of our food sources. I want to say a quick thing about bird feeders, because people think of them when they think about wildlife in their yards. They are a source of controversy, as you probably know. Some people are opposed to bird feeders for a variety of valid reasons. One of them is that it encourages dependency on people as a source of foods. Another one is that it encourages the proliferation of birds that a lot of people are not big fans of. That's particularly true of cowbirds, of starlings, and Eurasian collared doves. So, you know, there are reasons why people don't feed. If you do feed, you can expect that at some point in time, someone will tell you that you shouldn't, and that's okay. We have feeders in our yard. We have feeders in the front and the back, too, in each yard, as it were. But we feed for specific species. We feed for finches, goldfinches, and house finches, and we feed for orioles, tanagers, and grosbeaks, and we have hummingbird feeders. And if you do that, one of the things that you do is it means that if you're feeding for orioles, you're not going to be supporting cowbirds, for example, or you're not going to be supporting starlings. If you feed for finches and you feed Niger seed in Niger cages, that's going to cut down on the use of your feeder dramatically, if not entirely, by species that you don't want to support. So again, the idea is to be mindful. Just don't go out and get a feeder and throw feed wherever and whatever kind of feed happens to be on the shelf. But, you know, take some time to say, what is it that I want to accomplish here? What kind of birds do I want to feed? What kind of birds do I not want to feed? The other thing that you can provide other than food, well, let me go back to the feeders for just one quick second. You need to make sure that your feed is fresh. So, you know, don't put out tons of feed at one time. You want to store that in a dry container that mice and other things can't get into. You want to keep your feeder away from your bird bath so that the water doesn't cause problems with the feed. And you want to make sure your feeders are at least 5 feet away from any house windows. The other thing it needs to be 5 feet away from, at least, are places where predators, particularly cats, can hide and leap out from to attack the birds that are using your feeder. You will attract some birds for predation. There was a picture, I know, in the slide show of a mockingbird that we lost to a Cooper's hawk. We have Cooper's hawks that are regularly in our yard. I love them. They're one of my favorite birds, but they do predate other birds, and that's, you know, that's part of the circle of life. And the thing is not to make it easier for birds to be predated, especially by unnatural predators such as house cats. So let's talk a little bit about what we're gonna figure out how to plant and how we're gonna design our yard. A lot of times you'll hear the phrase backyards for wildlife, but I want to make it as clear as I can that there should be no idea that you have to restrict your wildlife gardening to the backyard because it's somehow or another not as attractive as it would be. That you don't want to show it off, that it can't somehow be called a garden, that it needs to be hidden. Our yard is designed for habitat value both in the front and the back, And I think it's also designed to be soothing and attractive for ourselves and our neighbors. So it's not like you need to go and make this little corner in the yard and say, okay, I'm going to do a subversion or a less than up to par version of gardening over here because this is for wildlife or this is for pollinators. If the idea is that you can spread this pollinator garden throughout your yard, and it's going to be really attractive, and people are really going to want to see it. Go to the native plant sale. Go to the native plant sections of nurseries. Walk around outside. It's good to be outside. It's good to get your steps in. Take a look at what other people have in their yard. My wife, Roberta, is going to be doing a garden design presentation a week from today. And it's going to focus a lot about how do you get ideas about how you want to plant your yard or how you want to configure it. But the bottom line to it is steal from whatever source makes you happy. If you see something that you like, put it in your yard. If you sit in our yard, there are parts of our yard that remind me of being in Yosemite Valley. There are parts of our yard that I hope remind me and other people of Little Lakes. There are parts of our yard that have gardening attributes that we've stolen from things that we've seen in Palm Springs because we really like that area as well. So do what makes you happy. Do what's fun. Do what seems to work for you. Understand that you don't have to expend a huge amount of money or time. You don't have to create this finished product in one fell swoop. Our yard, which is not finished, but is a lot closer, has taken us 17 years to put together. And some of those years it looked not so hot. And in some of those years, it started to look a lot better. But we did it incrementally. We started with a front lawn and a back lawn and a yard that looked like it might be tucked away somewhere in Sacramento. And we took out parts of that lawn and we reconfigured parts of it. And we did it one project at a time. And that was, I think, really helpful. Number one, it kept us from completely melting down and abandoning the whole idea. Number two, because we were able to work incrementally, we could start, experiment with something, experiment with a planting, experiment with a technique, experiment with a way of removing grass or whatever, and see how that worked. And if it worked well, we could do it some more. And if it didn't work, we could say, okay, we need to find another way to do that. So you don't have to rip out your entire yard or your entire existing landscape or your front lawn or whatever all at one time to develop a wildlife-friendly garden. Expand your sustaining garden. One way to do that is to infiltrate it as plants die. So if you lose a plant or you decide you just don't want this plant around anymore, which we often do, that's when you come in and plant a wildlife-friendly plant or a pollinator plant or something that will attract hummingbirds. And so by little increments and infilling, you can convert your garden over time into one that is more wildlife friendly. Again, steal from whoever, not their stuff, but their ideas from whoever has done something that you find attractive. Find out what other people do. Hopefully when the day comes that we can see each other in person, gardeners will be able to gather in person and ask each other questions, or there'll be garden tours again, and you can come see a garden and say, that looks really interesting. How did you do that? Exchange ideas like that. So, you know, it's an easy thing to get started. It just takes a small idea and it just needs to be mindful, and you need to do a little bit of research. And I gave Gabrielle some resources that you can use to get that information. And if you get a hold of her, I'm sure that she will share that with you. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, and this goes back to the very beginning of the talk, is, I want to pose the question of, what's in this for me? I'm happy to help wildlife. I'm happy to contribute to healthy bird populations. But really at the bottom line, I hope that there's something in this for me, myself, and in my experience, there certainly has been. We spend a lot of time in our garden, and I know a lot of people who work in their garden and work really hard in their garden, and they don't seem to spend as much time as I at least think they ought to. Go back out there and enjoy it. Sit in it and take an opportunity to see what you've brought into your yard. You can't do that necessarily when you're working in it. You have to sit quietly, you have to sit away somewhere, you have to sit at rest for like 15 or 20 minutes so that critters will come into your yard and they'll start to do what they do there. So we've created a lot of seating areas in our yard that have sight views to particular plantings. So we have a seating area that encompasses the whole yard. We have a seating area that lets you really see the grape and berry area. We have seating areas that are sort of focused on the seed areas. We have seating areas that are convenient to where perching birds sit. We just sit out there and see what they're doing. And we do keep track of how many birds, and we do keep track of what we've seen. And we're happy that we have a yard list that's now close to 80 and includes some interesting birds. We had mallards walk through our yard. I don't know where they came from and I don't know where they went, but they were there long enough to get to be part of the yard list. And so we wrote them down. So, enjoy your yard, enjoy your time, and get to be closer to the wildlife that you're supporting. Let them entertain you and give you things to learn from. So the last thing is, I'll close with, our yard attracted our neighbor's dog. Her name was Megan, and she was a really wonderful dog. And every Sunday when the family was away, I think at church, Megan would come and spend the morning and part of the afternoon with us. And she really liked our yard, and she'd come be with us when we were working, and we'd try to make sure that we took time to be with her when we weren't working. So you can never tell what's going to show up in your yard. Next slide. I can't guarantee you're going to get this, but you could if you went to the hardware store and found your very own pink flamingos. But somebody was nice enough to put these out, and they're very easy to sustain, and you can pretty much plant at random to get them. So let me know if you have any questions. If you have questions that you haven't thought of today, you can get those to Gabrielle. I'm sure she'll get those to me. Keep your eye on the Eastern Sierra Land Trust website, because when we get back to a little richer social life, they often have events that will gather together gardeners and people who are interested in talking to each other about what they're doing. I hope again that we can have the yard tour of the Pollinator gardens. There's a lot of certified gardens. We've got about a dozen, I think, in Chalfont, and they're really interesting to go look at. It's to me, you have this idea that I'm going to make a pollinator garden, and you go and you say, here's 20 people, and they made 20 pollinator gardens, and you go look at them, and they're all really, really different. And that's really cool, because it's this interpretation of an idea, and then it's a palette that you sort of paint on to carry out the creation of something that's going to sustain wildlife. So when the opportunity comes to go visit these gardens, please take advantage of it. It's really instructive and it's really fun. So are there any questions?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna the questions that I have that are kind of frequent questions for you, Pete. Okay. What can you about insects are good or bad ones, and is that a for source of food for or other?
Gabrielle, it's really hard to hear you. Pete, did you get that?
I think I know what the question is,
Okay.
and so I'm going to tell you what I think the question is, and then what I think the answer might be. The question was, is there such a thing as good and bad insects? And if so, what do you do to encourage the former and discourage the latter? From my own personal point of view, yeah, is such a thing as good and bad insects. I don't like ants in the house. And so, I'm going to try and do something about that when that happens, as it does every year. Outside, I'm not aware of any insects that we've had that I would categorize as bad. I'm not a big fan of tomato worms, and I'm not a big fan of squash bugs. But that's because I'm trying to grow tomatoes and squash, and it sort of interferes with what I'm trying to do. There are creatures that are fond of both of those, that come and feed on them. We have a lot of lizards on our property, and they are big fans of the tomato worms. And so, what might not be good for me, it certainly turns out to be good for our lizard population. We have a lot of ants, but the ants do a really good job of keeping a lot of other insects down that could be harmful to some of our plantings. The richer your insect population, the more food that they're going to provide for birds and for lizards and for other things that feed on them. So, to make a really short answer, except when they're in the house, we don't do much of anything to quote unquote control insects.
Great.
So what did you find to be the best way to remove lawn, particularly like I have Bermuda grass?
Oh my God.
Yeah, the dreaded.
Let me tell you, the short answer is there is none.
That's
The long answer, we whoever put in the lawn at our house did a fantastic job. They had that kind of sod that's underlaid by the plastic mesh, and so that stuff stuck together like nobody's business. We dug it all out. We did not solarize. In some of the beds that we have, we laid out newspaper. In some we laid out nothing. In others we laid out weed cloth. All of them are still subject to being invaded by Bermuda grass. We try to get rid of it in the spring every year as much as we can, knowing that it'll come back, and then I think we just live with it. And one of the ways to live with it is just to plant really densely with other stuff. Something that really competes well with, seems to compete well with it, is Yarrow. And so we've had better success converting our back lawn into a field of Yarrow and not trying to remove any more of it. And the Yarrow is actually, I'd say, about 2/3, maybe, easily over 50% of what was grass that we retained is now just a field of Yarrow.
And how did you do that? Just let it self-sow naturally, or did you plant
We
it?
planted plants from 6-packs. We planted big plants. We planted pounds of seeds. Every conceivable way we could think of to get Yarrow into places, we put it in there. We started with places where the lawn didn't grow well. I don't know why anybody in their right mind would grow a lawn out here, especially because the soil's crappy and it's just wasn't, this piece of earth was not intended to have a lawn on it. So our yard and the bad state of the lawn really dictated to us how we were going to plan out the lawn replacement. There were places where the lawn was dead, so we just dug all that out first, and started with that. And then what little lawn was really healthy is sort of what we have left.
And the yarrow kind of chokes out what's left of the grass.
It seems to. The expanse of yarrow just gets bigger every year, and I don't know exactly how it does it, but it seems to outcompete it. But it doesn't go away. I used to think somehow I would magically make that happen, but it's not gonna. So I don't have any encouragement for you except figure out a way to live with it.
And I think I saw in another presentation, do you actually mow your yarrow then?
I do, and that seems to really encourage its growth.
Okay.
And there's
I
so
have
much.
a lot of yarrow. I could easily start transplanting it over into the lawn.
Yeah, there's so much of it that we have to mow it, and it actually grows in a way that you can walk on it. And it's a very, very hardy plant, and
And it doubles in size.
yeah, it seems to literally double in size.
Ah, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just don't use the moonbeam.
My wife here, she should just tell you.
We always use the yarrow that has the dark green leaves. So there's the native yarrow you can get from CNPS. There's native like yarrow with white flowers at nurseries, which we used to be able to buy, and we haven't seen it for a while. So we've been buying the red pink yarrow at nurseries with the dark green leaves, and that works well too. Just the moonbeam one with the silver gray leaves and the yellow flowers, that one gets big and woody. It doesn't take well to mowing, and it doesn't spread by seeds. So just don't use that one. You can use that one as a plant in your planting beds, but any kind with a dark green leaf. And
Since mine is kind of spread all through the rocks in my yard, I'm thinking it spreads by seeds as well as by.
yeah, it does something with runners
Mhm.
and seeds. And I'll plant some in the fall and it'll look like it's dead. And in the winter or over the winter, even like this winter where I didn't water and we didn't have rain. And once things started growing, all those little guys I thought were dead were 3 times as big as they were when I planted them last fall. So,
Thank you.
pretty tough plant. And it's pretty when it gets mowed. It makes flowers, but the stalks are only like 2 inches high. And so your mower can go right over them and not destroy the flowers. So it's actually kind of cool.
Great. We've got a question from Teresa in the chat. Pete, she says that we have a lot of trees and shade. Any plant suggestions for shady areas?
Well, we don't have any shade. So we're not going to be very helpful, but Roberta's a master gardener, and so if she doesn't know the answer, she knows where the answer can be found.
Yeah, we are not gardening so much for shade out here. But I know if you go to CNPS, they will have plants for shade, dry shade, hot shade. I mean, I have good luck. My daylilies, which aren't exactly native, but the butterflies and the hummingbirds like them. Out here in Chalfont, I have to plant my daylilies in the partial shade or they will not grow. Weigelias grow well in the shade. Columbines, that would be a good one for shade. And they don't need a ton of water. So that's sort of a nice compromise there.
But there's, if you go to CNPS, there's this thing called, I think it's CalFlora.
Mhm.
It's a website that lets you type in your zip code, and it gives you native plants that are suited to that zip code. And so that gives you a good starting point. And then you can take a look at what those are. and then either on that reference, I can't remember if that's organized by shade or non-shade, but there are so many other websites or research or reference sites that if you have that basic zip code planting list, you can cross-reference with another one and get some shade ideas.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's a help. I think they talked about that at one of the other lunch talks, or I've seen it on other talks. I'll
Yeah.
check it out.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Yeah.
And Teresa, I have native plant sections and mixed sections and non-native sections of my place. And I've got an area where I've got columbine and snapdragons.
Oh, yeah.
And the snapdragons come back every year, and they're loved out there by the pollinators. So.
Okay, yeah. And I did plant some columbines last year, and they're doing pretty well. So maybe I can expand on that. But
Yeah, and
yeah.
sometimes they will seed off in your yard.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you could try. I mean, I'm not sure where your house is, but the penstemons might be able to tolerate a little shade. If it's super
Yeah.
some of this just sort of depends on what your maximum summer temperature is too. I mean,
Yeah,
some
we're in
people
Western
shade their
Chips.
tomatoes in the Owens Valley because it gets so hot, which seems
Yeah.
sort of unheard of to me. But
Teresa, Katie Quinlan recently shared that Yarrow and Paintbrush do well in shade. And Calscape, I think, is the website that Pete maybe was just thinking about. It's calscape.org.
Okay.
And you can go to a category under shade plants.
Okay, thanks. I'll do that. Yeah, thank you.
And that sort of re-emphasizes the idea that as you go along and you do this, you need to go out and really take a careful look at your yard, because we do have shady spots. And so, we have to shift gears for that spot. And so, if you can take the time, and it's remarkable how often I don't take the time. I just have a plant and I want to put it somewhere. To really look at that at the area and say, okay, this is hot, and it's got reflected heat from rocks that are part of our landscaping or whatever, and it's constantly in sun. It works out a lot better in the long run to take that extra half a day or hour or so to just really look hard at what's going on out here.
Yeah.
and if you're in town, your plants have access to a higher water table than mine do. It's all different.
Yeah, and we do have a lot of lawns, so they get water anyway. I'm slowly removing areas of it like you guys did, but
Yeah,
It's a
we always
process.
start with the part the rainbow doesn't hit.
Yeah.
Just keep making it bigger and bigger and bigger.
yep, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Hey, Pete, I have a question, and maybe this is something that Roberta is going to be talking about at her upcoming workshop. But when you say you go places and you see things and you're inspired, like you brought home something from Palm Springs, are you talking design-wise, or are you literally seeing about collecting seeds or getting plants from that area and transplanting here? Can you share more about that?
We have brought home plants from Palm Springs with extremely limited success. It's just too cold here. But it's both. What were we do? Well, we were walking down the street.
Don't give away my talk.
I can't, I'm sorry.
See, this isn't my talk.
Yeah, but we were walking down the street a little bit ago, and we saw this planting at in a shopping center. Shopping centers are great places to look for gardening ideas because they don't get very good maintenance. They get pretty spotty watering. It's not the greatest condition to grow plants, but there are some really beautiful plantings in shopping centers in Reno and in Carson City. And so we've taken a lot of ideas for plantings from that. And you see a lot of different structural ideas. So, we've taken pictures of that, or here's a way of a rock formation works, or, just whatever. If you see something that's attractive, you can do that. You can
So-
figure out a way to do that.
So come back next week for more.
Yes.
And I really, that was not an intentional setup, but I'm glad that to know that I'll learn more about that next week. Thanks. Any other questions? Well, we had a couple in here. Let me see. Pete, what are other natural sources of food that we may not realize are good for our garden?
Well, I think that there are just a lot of plants that provide food that are not advertised as pollinator plants exactly, and so they don't show up, especially in the little newspaper articles or whatever that are the 5 pollinator plants for your yard, and I think those give you the idea that there's only 5 plants that do the trick. Again, I can't think of anything obscure off the top of my head, but as you walk around, we walk around a lot in the land adjacent to our house, and you'll see some plant and it'll be swarmed over by some kind of pollinator, and you think, well, how is that? Why is that happening? Because that doesn't look to me like it fills the bill as a pollinator plant, which shows you the limitations of what I know. And we'll try to figure out what it is, and can we put that into the garden? And what's interesting is we have a front backyard, and then we have a backyard, and the front backyard is a sort of the backyard that you've seen that has a little bit of lawn in it and kind of more formal organization. And the backyard is where is all native plants and native landscaping. The pollinators that you see in the backyard are not the same ones that you see in the front backyard, if that makes sense. And so the pollinators are remarkably specific, plant specific. And so there are, a whole host of plants that we have that support a pollinator or maybe a couple. And you'll put a plant, or we'll put a plant in and come back a little bit later and say, oh my God, look at this. We've never seen this bee, or we've never seen this whatever before, because we never had that plant there. So what I would say is that almost anything that flowers is a potential source of food, and almost anything that makes seeds is going to be a source of food. And it doesn't have to be a direct link. Remember that. Hummingbirds don't feed just on nectar, and they don't feed just on sugar water. And in fact, if they had to do that, they would die. A large quantity of their diet is made up of insects. So if I can create a planting that creates insects, I have created food for hummingbirds. And so because the chain is so broad and so interlinked, it's really hard to imagine that some kind of plant that you put in the yard that's native, and you get to be a healthy, thriving plant, is not going to be a benefit to somebody somewhere along the line.
Great. Thank you, Pete.
Sure.
Thank you. Well, there's one more quick question in here. Well, I think it's a quick question for perches, Pete. Does it matter? Like, can you put perches anywhere? What's the good location for perches?
Perches can be anywhere. And in fact, if you have a yard and it doesn't have a tree in it, but your neighbor has a tree, then your yard has a perch.
Okay.
So it's another thing that we often tell people, try to the extent that you can, make your neighbor's garden your garden. If they have something really pretty to look at, orient your planting so that it takes your eye to share in their planting. If they have a particularly attractive perching structure, put stuff near that perching structure, your feeder or your water, bird bath or whatever kind of water device you want to have, put it near there. We have outside our civilized yard, we have an olive tree, and for that tree is just bird happy. With all different kinds of birds, and they sit up in that olive, and you can sit and watch them, and they are able, given whatever their eyesight is like and whatever they're doing, they're able to sit in that olive, which is about 40 feet beyond the fence, and they perch there and then fly catch in the backyard. So you can incorporate perches anywhere, and if you need one and your neighbor has them, then you got one.
Great. Thank you. I know we're getting close to our time, and this is where Gabrielle would normally thank everybody, and certainly Pete, you and Roberta. For those who don't know, Pete and Roberta have been part of the Pollinator program before it was a program. They helped us visualize it. They helped us come up with the criteria. They're on our advisory committee. They are there all the time, helping us and supporting us and helping this program get even bigger and stronger. So thank you so much, Pete. And thank you, Roberta, for popping in as well. So thank you, Pete and Roberta, very much. Really appreciate it. I know that, I don't know if you can see it, but there people are clapping and there's clap reactions going up. And Gabrielle just put in the chat the link to next week's native plant sale. So feel free to grab that off. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Gabrielle. Gabrielle, why don't you put your email in there? I think people have it because they got your email for the Zoom. So feel free to ask her any questions and we will get back to you. And thank you so much for coming, and hope to see you. I think it's Monday. Is that yours? Or is it next Friday? I don't have
Friday.
Friday. Okay, a week from today, we'll get some creative designs from Roberta. So thanks so much, guys. I appreciate you joining us and look forward to seeing you another time. Thanks, Gabrielle.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have fun in your yard.
Yeah, I'm going out now.
Excellent.